Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sports Time HQ. I am Fernando, and I am your host of Sports Time HQ. Today, I am joined by Coach Donnie Hess. Coach, how are you doing today?
I am not doing too bad, sir. It is a lovely day, and I love talking the great sport of Australian rules football.
Yes, Australian Rules Football. 2 teams of 22 players, 18 players on each team take the field. The games are played on a oval field of a max of 185 meters by 155 meters. It's the largest field of any team sport. And Coach, I know that you are a head coach for Des Moines Roosters. Would you like to talk about the team and everything?
Oh, the Des Moines Roosters were started here in Des Moines, Iowa in 2009. We had a couple of young men who were originally from the western part of the state who actually found the sport in LA. There's actually a league here in the States called the USAFL. There are teams throughout the states. Well, unfortunately, their father got ill and they decided to come back here to Des Moines. They met up with an expat or former Australian who happened to live here in Iowa, and they got the Roosters started in 2009, and yours truly found them through the Australian who happened to actually come into my job at the time. He was like, hey, when I chatted with him, he was like, hey, have you ever heard of Australian rules football? And I'm like, yeah, I'd actually seen it as a kid on TV and thought, what the heck, why not? I tried it out. I fell in love with the sport. Kind of been in and out with the team. And then in the last couple of years, because I love the sport so much, I've really dove into it. I decided I give a shot at coaching. They were looking for a coach, and it kind of all worked out. So we're a fun team, mostly of Americans. So we don't, unfortunately, there's not a lot of Australians. They get to Iowa, where kind of a farming state. We have cities. Yes, we're not just all cornfields and all that, but it's hard to get Australians to want to come to Iowa. So we're primarily an American-based team, and we've had on and off success. But we're a fun group, and we get after it in an old Midwestern style.
Yeah, and you told me before the show that you actually was up at like 4:30 in the morning to watch the AFL because it's played in Australia, and Australia and here is total different time zones.
Yeah, with at least with me, it is 15 hours ahead, at least in Melbourne. So when the professional games are going on at about 7 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night, there it's about 3 or 4 in the morning here. So it's not exactly the easiest thing to follow. I also have the luxury of being an international member to my club, the Sydney Swans. I pay a little money, and then I get access to an app that's called the Watch AFL app, which is part of my membership. And then I also get a hat, scarf, all sorts of little trinket things, which are absolutely awesome to get. And then during the season, when the games go live, all you have to do is click on the app, click on the game, and there's your game full on in Australian. You even get Australian commercials, which are absolutely hilarious. I have to say, if you love hearing commercials in an Australian accent, it is worth it. But I love my team. I love the sport. I don't mind having a little sleep deprivation to be able to see my team live, because unfortunately, with the internet and as many people as I follow, it's not always easy to not get spoilers. So I've gotten to the point now, if I could stay up till 4, if I have to get up at 4:40 a.m. to watch the game so I don't have to worry about spoilers, I'll do it.
Yeah, it's definitely better to watch the game than find out at the end and get spoiled.
Yeah, especially like I had one that got spoiled where we actually lost on a last second kick. So that always is kind of gut wrenching a little bit. So I didn't want to have that happen anymore.
Yeah, and speaking of last second kicks, so many people might not even know about the sport. So I'm sure we could definitely talk about the sport and how it even starts. So I know that the ball actually starts in the center circle and it's bounced by the referee, and they actually have to jump to try and get it. And it's almost like a jump ball in basketball.
Yeah, it's what the position player that competes for that is called the ruckman, and usually they are the tallest person on the team. They bounce it originally, but if for any reason the bounce goes wonky and it goes too far to the right or to the left, giving a ruckman a disadvantage, they'll call it back and then they'll just throw it up like basically a basketball jump ball. These two players and the original bounce, when they jump up, they're just trying to tap it down to their teammates so then they can kick it down the field to a teammate who maybe could catch it, who could then have a kick on goal. So it's very, very basic when it comes to it. You score by kicking the ball through four long goalposts that with no crossbar. So imagine basically two posts in the air, two really tall ones, and then two really short ones on the outsides. You score points by kicking the ball through those. If the ball goes between the two big posts, in between them, it is worth 6 points. And then if it goes between one tall and one short, it's 1 point. If it's touched either by the offensive team or defensive team and goes through, it is then 1 point. So that's the primarily so the scoring. There's a few other twists to it when it comes to if the ball hits the post. If it hits the tall post, it's only worth 1 point. If it hits the short post off a bounce, like if it bounces on the ground, it's actually a throw in. The referee will turn his back to the field, grab it and cup the end and heave it as hard and as high as he can into field to then restart play. If you were to kick the ball at those goalposts and it hits one of those short ones on the full or in the air, it's actually a turnover, and the defensive team then gets a free kick outside of that point post.
Wow, that is very interesting. And I actually did just put up a screenshot of the actual field and what it looks like, and how we were just saying the center circle is where they start, the 50-meter lines, and then you got the goalposts at the very ends of each point. And there's four tall posts, like you said, and it's almost like a field goal. If you get it in between both, then you get a total of 6 points.
Yep. You get a total of 6 points. And like I said, if it touches and goes on the outside, it's worth 1 point. And then the 50-meter lines, the reason those are there is because if you mark the ball, one of your saving graces in this game is catching the ball on the full, and that's called a mark. If you mark the footy and you are going towards the goalposts that are closest to you and you're inside that 50-meter arc, you actually get 30 seconds to have a shot on goal. That 30 seconds, nobody can tackle you and nobody can come within 5 meters of you. So you have plenty of time. But if you exceed that 30 seconds, or you go off your mark, which means you go off your line to the right or to the left, the referee will yell play on and you are free game to tackle again.
Yeah, and if you are actually outside of the 50-meter line, you only have 10 seconds to kick the ball.
Yep, you only get 10 seconds, and most of the time that's because most realistically, you're not going to be able to kick more than 50 meters for a goal, so they give you 10 seconds to try to find a teammate to kick it to. Now, I think a lot of people, when you say kicking it, well, coach, how do you do that? It's very, very different. I think a lot of people, we're so used to, Americans are used to the American punter in gridiron or American football. A lot of Australians become punters because of the skill that they have to learn. Unlike the American punter, where you're kicking it as high as you can so your teammates can go out and tackle you, this is a pass to teammates to move the ball up the field. So you actually drop it end to end down, so then you can kick it so it can go quicker. So then if your teammate catches it, it's much easier for them to catch it because the higher it goes, the longer it takes for it to come down, which is very, very unique to the sport. The best way to move it down the field is the kick, because you can kick it a lot farther than you can handball it, which is the other way to move it from one person to another, which is basically like punching it. I've heard this analogy used. It's kind of like scooping up ice cream. You punch up onto the end of the ball and that propels it to your teammate. Most of the time this is done within 15 meters. Some players are strong enough they can actually do it more, but usually you got to put a little bit of oomph into that handball to be able to get it there.
Yeah, and you said every 15 meters is when they have to at least bounce it or pass it. And many people that watch football may not know how big or how wide that meters is. And to compare it to football, it's about every 16 yards that you have to bounce it, which is a good chunk. But if you're running and there's no lines on the ground, on the grass, so it's kind of like a judgment. And that ball, it's an oval shaped ball, so that can easily move, and it could totally go in a direction that you don't even want it to go and ruin the whole momentum.
Exactly. And that's kind of the other thing too, is when it comes to the balance, is it is a skill that takes a lot of practice, because unlike a basketball dribble where you kind of flex your wrist to push it down to give it more momentum to kick it back up, you almost kind of have to straight arm it, because if you don't, it's going to hit the end just right and it's going to bounce to your right or bounce to your left. It's going to go kind of funky. In fact, I actually have the pleasure of a footy here. This is one that actually I have here that's actually an indigenous round footy that I purchased recently that has a lot of the really cool indigenous markings on it, which I think is very, very cool. But as you can see, it's still got the laces, just like in American football, but it's a little bit wider and it's a little bit more it's less pointed at the end, since the kicking motion, since you're not throwing it like in American football.
Yeah, and it almost reminds me of a rugby football. Almost.
It's just a tiny bit smaller than a rugby ball. Rugby ball is a little bit wider, but yes, the same rounded corners, but just a little bit skinnier than a rugby ball. It's not as wide.
Yeah, and earlier you were talking about a mark, but there's also a different type of mark called the spectacular mark, which I found really interesting. That you are able to actually, you're not able to push someone, but you're able to use the opponent and stand on top of them, basically, to try and get it if they're just standing there, to get the ball from a punt.
Yep, that is it. We'll use some Aussie terms that I love using. It could be known in the broadcast as a specky, a screamer, or a hanger. All of these could be mentioned when it comes to this particular mark. And this is, as you said, it is perfectly legal in this game, as long as you are playing the football, to jump on your opponent's back to catch the footy. If you catch it and you happen to land on this person's back, it's completely fine. Regularly in the game, you cannot go through somebody's back. You can't push them over. You can't go through them. So this is kind of this unique little skill that I think a lot of people don't even, I think a lot of Americans see it when they see the greatest marks on YouTube, or they see all this and they happen. They're just not super constant. They are kind of a unique thing. So when they happen, they usually are very, very exciting. That's why they call them a screamer, because most of the time the announcers kind of scream when they see them happen.
Yeah, for sure. And so it's kind of crazy to see that, because in football, you can't really be doing anything like that, or even just regular American sports. You can't be doing that. It's considered a penalty. And there is one penalty that I found, not penalty, but something that I found pretty interesting is, so you did talk about passing the ball, but if you throw the ball, it's actually illegal. And it's just, it's considered an automatic turnover.
Yep. You cannot pass it. It's kind of one of those fun little rules that they have to kind of keep things going. That's why they instituted the handball. But if you throw the ball and the referee sees in the umpire, there'll be a few Aussies if they catch this. I don't want them getting upset with me. They have umpires, not referees. Not getting on you. They're very particular, but I absolutely love that about them. Is they really love their sport. They want it to be said correctly. So if the umpire sees you throw the ball, like if you can't get your fist to it and it comes out and it goes to a teammate, that is a turnover. You then stand where you made that infraction, and the other person, now kind of like the mark, now they have 10 seconds to decide what teammate they want to pass it to, and then they continue on with play. So yes, you cannot throw it. That is an automatic turnover if the umpire catches you.
If the umpire catches you. Now, has there been any games that you have been in that has happened and it wasn't called?
Oh, it happens all the time. Sometimes, especially in the pro games, the players are very, very good at making it look like a handball and more of almost throwing it than they do. Sometimes they get caught, sometimes they don't. In the USAFL game, again, you have umpires that haven't done it as much as others. It'll happen. I don't think it's done intentionally. Like I don't think anybody intends to throw it, but if you're new to the game or if you get in that situation where you just can't get your hand on it, it happens. So
Yeah, so it happens, and if you get caught, you get caught. But if you don't, it's lucky and benefits the team, I guess.
mm-hmm.
Another penalty that I want to talk about is the 50-meter penalty. Do you want to talk about that?
Okay, well that was instituted not too long ago, just because it really kind of makes you not want to do any infractions. Basically, because the field is so big, they wanted to find a way to penalize if you continue to do something wrong. Like for Australians, if you continue to yell at an umpire, unlike American football where you get a 15-meter penalty, you give 50 meters away in this for what they call abuse. You don't want to do an infraction. Like if you mark the if a like an opponent of mine marks the ball and I knock them over after the whistle is blown for the mark, the umpire will most likely call me for a 50-meter penalty. It's a severe penalty. I really and sometimes wish they would decrease it a little bit, because especially with the kicking accuracy and the ability of present day players, at least in the pro game, that 50-meter penalty is harsh.
Yeah, and that's very far away. And if you're trying to kick it from a distance, I mean, even kickers in the NFL trying to kick a 50-yard field goal, for instance, which is shorter than a 50-meter, it's a ways away, and it can be easily missed. But you did talk about how after the siren, you can still win a game, even when the final whistle blows. And the final whistle blows after 80 minutes of play. There's 4 quarters, 20 minutes each quarter, and there's also extra time, just like soccer, that can be due to stoppages during the game, and that can be up to 10 minutes of overtime, basically, you could say. But after the siren, there could be a winner. Do you want to explain how there could be a winner?
Yeah, well, the easiest way to describe that is most of the time that will happen if a player marks the footy inside the 50-meter arc, and normally there's under 30 seconds left to play in the game, because kind of like the NFL or sports here, sometimes the clock continues to run even while play is happening. So if a player marks the footy inside the 50 meters and there's 10 seconds to go on the clock, that clock will expire. The sirens will go off, which is unlike American sports. They have a siren because the stadiums are so big. The siren is a way to be able to get it through the entire stadium. Is that player will get to take his kick. He does not get to not take his kick. So any points that are scored from that kick, as long as it's not touched by a defender in the field of play, the points count. So if you get a situation like a couple weeks ago, Geelong was playing the Western Bulldogs at home, and a player, Gary Rowan, marks the footy with 13 seconds left to play. Geelong is down 2 points at the time. So this kick is massive. If Geelong kicks this goal, if Gary Rowan kicks this goal, Geelong wins the game. If he misses, the Western Bulldogs win this game. Both of those teams at the time are in the top 4 of the playoffs, or the finals, as they call them there. So this is a chance to continue to stay in the top part of the playoff bracket or the finals bracket. Rowan kicks the goal after the siren. Geelong wins. Western falls due to the fact that he marked it and could kick after the siren. And this has not been the only one. There's been at least 3 of them this season that have come down to an after the siren kick, and all 3 of them have actually won the kicker's team the game.
Yeah, and the final score doesn't look like regular football or even soccer, you could say. It's a very high scoring game because of the intensity and the athleticism, the amount of times that you have to kick it. And if you kick it and it gets deflected off your own hand through the goal, it's considered a point, and it's called a behind. On average, do you know on average about how many points a game?
Oh, it kind of fluctuates every year because a certain year, this year the scoring has gone up because they changed a rule called man on the mark rule. Because previously, when you mark the footy, your defender could move right to left. He just could not go forward over the mark, which is where he caught the footy. This year, they instituted a rule that once you mark the footy, once your defender has stand on the mark, the referee will yell stand. That player cannot move now. He is basically a statue until the referee then yells play on or the ball is kicked by the marking player, which has opened up the game because previously with the player being able to move laterally, he could cut off kicking lanes, which would then stifle play. So making the man on the mark rule this year has really, really increased scoring to where most games on average are in the upper 70s, early 80s. There was one game this year that ended 109 to 102. So
Wow.
there are games that are triple digits. I mean, it's like the NBA, but as you saw, the field is massive. So you're like, coach, how do they score? Well, these guys are so accurate with their kicks. They've been doing this for so long. The easiest way I describe it is for us is we play catch. We play baseball and we play catch with our fathers here in the States. That's one thing I think a lot of people talk about. In Australia, they kick the footy. They have kick to kick. They kick it back and forth. So for them, they're kicking the ball all the time from ages 4 and up. So this is nothing new to them. So the scoring goes really, really quickly. Teams will actually hit the ball through for a behind just to get the ball back because on a behind, the defensive team then gets the ball in the goal square in on their defensive side and now have to go the entire length of the field to score. So some teams will give up points to get the footy back. So that's why I think the scoring is a little bit higher because it's constantly back and forth. It is absolutely exciting. You would think a game with so much distance, there's no way there's close games, but there are a ton of games every week that are within 15 points, and they're exciting and they are an absolute blast to watch.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I mean, there's 18 players on each side. So there's a bunch of people. There's a total of 36 players on the field at once. And the field's so massive, and there's so many different opportunities that you could do. You can kick it to make a mark, a spectacular mark. You can handball it. I mean, you can do a bunch of different things. And just to try and get from one side to the other, it can be pretty easy because there is no offside penalties.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you're a forward, yes, you're supposed to be forward, but you don't always have to be forward. You could slide into the middle for a little bit and then slide back to the forward.
Yeah, definitely. There are players that start off in the mid. There are players that start off in the midfield during the ruck tap to start the thing, and then they'll shift forward for the next 10, 15 minutes and then go back into the midfield. I mean, it's a constantly fluctuating game. I've seen a time where the full forward, the guy that's supposed to be kicking the goals, is marking the kick out in the defensive end, kicking it to a teammate, and then sprinting as fast as he can to get into the 50 to try to get open for the next kick to go into 50 to try to score. These guys are so well adversed, not only in conditioning. I mean, these guys are absolutely insane with their conditioning, but they have to do all of this while trying to not be tackled, because if you get tackled, and you had a chance to get rid of the footy, it's called holding the ball. If you had a chance to get rid of the footy to a teammate and you get tackled, that's a turnover. So then the defensive team gets a ball there. So there's so many different ways to move it. There's you have infractions, you have penalties, you have free kicks because somebody tackles too high. You cannot tackle above the shoulder or below the knees. Too high or tripping is basically what they call it. So there are rules. When you first watch it, it may seem like there's not, but there are rules kind of dictating the way it goes. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, this is a sport that is so much fun to watch. They're incredible athletes. In fact, this week, we have a player that is going to play his 400th game of AFL footy, only the sixth player in the history of the sport. And this sport, ladies and gentlemen, for those that don't know, is over 100 years old. And this is only the fifth player ever to play 400 games.
Wow. For something that's over 100 years old and only playing 400 games and being the fifth player ever, that's pretty spectacular. I'll be honest. And you were talking about the tackling in between shoulders and knees. The opposing team can also block kicks. They can intercept the ball. they can push someone off the field, but you have to tackle in between the shoulders and the knees, or like you said, tripping above the knee, above the shoulders could be considered head-to-head contact, almost just like the NFL.
Mhm.
So it's almost just like NFL rule where to be tackled, you should be tackling between the shoulders and knees. That way you don't have any injury. And like you were talking about with tackling, no one wears any gear.
Mm-mm.
No.
Nope. There are no required padding. Some players will wear a helmet, but it's basically a bona fide like stocking cap that they put over their head that's got padding, but it's not really like the NFL helmet that we're used to here in the States. And yes, there's concussions, there's injuries, they happen. Unfortunately, in a high contact, heavily collision sport, as you would call Aussie Rules football, injuries do happen. But the one thing I give the rules is a lot of the rules are trying to protect the players as much as possible. You actually, unlike the NFL, you cannot tackle through the back. If you tackle a player from behind, you must roll them or fall down to your knees. You cannot push them forward. If they land going forward and you go through their back, that is called an in the back penalty. So then if you're tackling somebody and you go through their back, the person with the footy gets to keep the free kick and you have to do the free kick there. So they are trying to protect as much as possible. Like I said, concussions happen, but many of the rules are based so then we don't have head-high contact. That's why we don't want any contact above the head. And then below the knees, we don't want to break somebody's ankles or tear a knee ligament by tripping somebody in just the right way.
I mean, that's great that they're trying to protect the players because that's always the most important thing of the game.
Yeah, definitely for sure. And in especially with our league where it's not professional, it really comes in handy for some of those rules because it kind of helps us kind of maintain the structure of the game and be able to not have anybody get hurt when you're not getting paid for this.
Yeah, that's very true. Um, we actually have a question from Swamp Donkey _90, and he's actually one of my co-hosts that couldn't be here tonight. Coach, are you a fan of the international rules series between the Gaelic footballers and the Aussies?
Yes, that is actually a lot of fun because it throws in Gaelic football, which I think, again, is another sport a lot of Americans don't see. It is basically Aussie rules, but with a soccer ball. You can pick it up, you can carry it. And their goal is basically like, I think a lot of us have went to high schools here in the States where you have the soccer goal underneath the American football goalposts. And that's basically the goals for Gaelic football. It's above the bar, which is 1 point, and in the goal for 3 points. And in international rules games, the only thing they change is they add the behind posts from Aussie Rules Football, and the points then go 6, 3, 1. So 1 point for a behind, 3 points above the bar, 6 points for kicking it in the goal. They adapt a few Australian rules football rules, like there is no marking in Gaelic football, where in the international rules there are. So they get the free kick opportunity there. They usually play the game on a Gaelic rules pitch, which is kind of like a rugby pitch, just a little bit longer. And there is tackling in the international rules, where in Gaelic there's only shoulder to shoulder contact, which the Aussies call hip and shoulder, which you can bump people out of the way to get a hold of the footy. So yes, the international rules series is a lot of fun. The Irish tend to play much better because they're used to the round ball a lot more than the Aussies are. But the Aussies have played really, really well in that series. They've won at several games. In fact, a few years ago, they had an indigenous team, which was all indigenous players of indigenous backgrounds that played in that game, which was a blast to see some of the best footy players of indigenous backgrounds playing in the international rules series.
Yeah, that is definitely something great to see, and how similar Gaelic football and Aussie football is. It's so similar, and even with the international rules, they just combine both of them together.
Yeah, and the other cool thing about it is that many Irish players have actually found their way over to Aussie rules because with the Gaelic football, it's not professional. It is you're playing for the pride of your county. But many Irish players are starting to go over and play Aussie rules because they can play professionally. They can get paid to play the sport. And many of them adapt really well. It takes them a while to get used to the different ball, but many of the things besides tackling are the same. It's the same conditioning patterns. It's the same kicking to open teammates, all the things like that. So many Irish players have actually transitioned very well into footy.
Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, it's I've noticed that this whole sport, I mean, I've watched it and it's a fun sport to watch, but it incorporates so many different sports, from rugby, of the rugby football, to Gaelic football, obviously with the goalpost, football with the goalpost, kicking, NFL, soccer. I mean, it just incorporates so many different sports into one, and it's just so intense and so much fun that, like, even the announcers, they scream because it just gets so intense, and it's so many close games on a high scoring type of game that makes you think, like, how can this be so close yet it's so much fun to watch.
Yeah, it is. And there are blowouts. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. There are blowouts. There was a game earlier this season between the Western Bulldogs and the North Melbourne Roos that ended Western Bulldogs 167 points to the North Melbourne Roos 39. So there are blowouts. They happen. I don't like them as much because it's not as entertaining, especially when you get a game like that when it's over at halftime. It doesn't make for as exciting a watch, but that really it has shown that, I mean, when a team is really really good and a team that's really rebuilding like North Melbourne is this year, sometimes those games happen. But there have been a lot of really close games this particular season and previous seasons before that I feel like I've joining footy in the last 10 years, and I've joined at some of the best times because there have been so many exciting games. I can't tell you how many times I've had friends on Twitter who are in Australia and I'm watching a game and it's really, really close. And they're like, Coach, how are you doing? Are you okay? Because they're so exciting. They're so heart pounding. They're like, you're not going to have a heart attack, are you? I'm like, nope, I'm good. But it's wow. So
It gets really intense from what it seems like. And you started to mention some of the teams, but we never mentioned any of the other teams. And I think that all the other teams need some type of love. And
sure.
and of course, in this, by ESPN, is all the point standings of all the games
Mhm.
that has been played.
Yep.
Obviously, we see Melbourne sitting at number one with 14 games played. They're 12-2. And all the way at the very bottom, you see North Melbourne, who you mentioned is a rebuild team that has played 14 games, has only 10 points, and is 2-11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. I was actually going to talk about Richmond that you were talking about earlier, just before the podcast. You mentioned about Richmond just being in the very borderline of being eliminated from the playoffs to going into the playoffs. Currently, they are sitting at 8, which is good enough to make it to the playoffs.
Yeah, right now. But unfortunately, they've played one extra game because their game was actually their first game. Their game of this round was actually Thursday morning, our time here in the States. And unfortunately, they fell to, if you're looking at this thing, the Gold Coast Suns, a team that has pretty much been a young team that is perpetually down at the bottom. They are the Detroit Lions, the Cleveland Browns, unfortunately, of the AFL, a team that does not win a ton of games. It's hard to find fans that want to cheer for them, but this has actually been a year where this Richmond team, as I was telling you before we started, this is a Richmond team that has won 3 of the last 4 flags, the 3 of the last 4 championships. So them being in 8th place currently, just inside the finals, and having lost again on Thursday to Gold Coast, there are many people throughout Melbourne media that are talking, could this be the death blow to Richmond's season, to where they will not make the finals, not be able to defend their championship that they won last year in a very crazy COVID season, especially with, if you can see this, Fremantle has a game later on this weekend, and if they win, they will surpass Richmond with the 4 points that they get for winning. We'll really quick go through this. For every win, you get 4 points in the AFL standings. There are draws. You don't see them very often. They're very, very, very rare. But one has happened earlier this year. You will get 2 points for a draw, and a loss, obviously, no points. As you can see from the standings, Melbourne is the cream of the season this year. One of the best records, 12-2. They have beaten most of the teams they have played. Their 2 losses, really, you can almost say were semi-flukes. They lost to Adelaide, a team lower bottom of the table, that they kind of surprised them on that road trip to Adelaide. And then just before the bye week, Melbourne lost to Collingwood, who conveniently is what many people in Australia would call the New York Yankees. You either love them or you hate them. Plain and simple. There is no in between with them. Collingwood is love or hate. Unfortunately, Collingwood's head coach resigned just before this game due to basically the club is going through a rebuild. There's going to be some changes in the president and some of the places. He knew he probably wasn't going to get re-signed, so he's resigning while he can. And conveniently, his team decided to send him out on a winning streak, knocking out Melbourne. Thus, again, throwing in a loss to Melbourne, I don't think a lot of people expected. So, yes, this is a Melbourne team that is very, very good. Western Bulldogs in second, another really, really good team, a team that is absolutely fantastic to watch. Been so much fun. Third place is the Geelong Cats. The Cats, unfortunately, the good thing this morning, have won their game over the Essendon Bombers, a young and up-and-coming team this year. I think a lot of people expected them not to make the finals. They're really close to the final spot, but unfortunately, they're going through a tough patch right now with some really difficult teams on their schedule. The Brisbane Lions are in fourth, a team that has kind of come out of nowhere in the last 5 seasons. They were a team that was a perennial down at the bottom of the table, 14th, 15th, 16th, always losing a lot of games. But 3 years ago, they clicked and everything's really going. They brought in a couple of really good players over the offseason in the trade period. And again, this Brisbane Lions team is trying to get to what they just fell short last year is the grand final or the Super Bowl of the AFL. Following from there, if I remember correctly, I haven't had a chance to look at this. I believe next is the Port Adelaide Power, another really, really good team. A team, unfortunately, as I look at it right now, is they're fighting a stigma. They're fighting a team that they beat the lower teams. They beat the teams that are not going to make the finals, the teams that are not having good seasons, but they're struggling against some of the better teams. Thankfully, this last weekend, they beat, unfortunately, my Sydney Swans in a really exciting game that went to a 10-point game. All due respect, Port Adelaide, an awesome team. I think they will make the finals. I think they'll give some shout outs. I hope they get healthy. They've had a few injuries in just the right places. Next, if I remember correctly, comes my beloved Sydney Swans, a team that actually kind of came out of nowhere. We're at the bottom of we were towards the bottom of the table the previous 2 seasons, a younger team that's kind of progressing with it. But this year we've come out of nowhere. We surprised a couple of teams early. We beat Brisbane. We beat Richmond at Richmond's home ground by over 40 points. So this Swans team is kind of the Jekyll and Hyde a little bit of the finals because they had so many really good games early in the year, and they've kind of struggled over the previous weeks. They lost last week to Port. They lost their game going into the bye week against a Hawthorn team that's really, really struggling at the time. So this is a Swans team that many people have pegged as the weakest team in the finals until Richmond has decided to lose 2 of their last 3, unfortunately. Following them is the West Coast Eagles, a team that has been really good at home, but is really not so good on the road. So this is a West Coast Eagles team that a lot of people are like, what team are we getting? Are we getting the really good team at home or the road team? And unfortunately, due to COVID issues in Australia, the West Coast Eagles are in Victoria, which is where Melbourne is as we speak. In fact, all of the teams in the AFL are in Victoria due to issues of COVID clusters in all of the other states in Australia. Currently, we again talked about Richmond 8th. We'll jump to 9th. The 9th will be the Fremantle Dockers, again, a team that nobody expected to be in this playoff hunt, but they're surviving a cavalcade of injuries this year. They have had so many injuries. They have the most games lost from their injury list of the entire out of every team in the entire league. So that they have just been absolutely just snake bitten with injuries. We follow there's the GWS Giants, one of the other really, really new teams besides the Gold Coast Suns, a team that really got a lot of superstars. And they're kind of losing one or two every single year, but they're continuing to be successful. But this is also a team that has lost some games they really shouldn't. They're a really, really good team. Probably shouldn't lose some of the ones they have, thus leaving Richmond still in the playoffs as we speak currently. The Essendon Bombers, like I said, unfortunately fell this morning to the Geelong Cats. But again, an up and coming team, a team that I think really is going to make some noise in the next few seasons because they've got a lot of young players. They had 3 draft picks inside the top 10 this year, and all 3 are playing, and all 3 are playing really, really well, including who I think has a really good shot for the Rising Star or Rookie of the Year, and that is Nick Cox, a almost 6-foot winger, which is not something you see very often. He's rather tall. Actually, I think he's like 6'2", 6'3", but he plays the midfield, which normally you're either a ruckman at that size or you're a forward. He's a midfielder. He's got incredible pace, can kick with both feet, incredible player. I think he's one of the really, really high guys I see for the Rising Star or Rookie of the Year. Following Essendon is St. Kilda. St. Kilda is definitely the Jekyll and Hyde of this year, a team that made the finals last year, won their first finals, and this year they've been ravaged with injuries. They've been blown out more times than I can think of, but they've won games they probably shouldn't have, including beating Richmond 2 weeks ago. So this is a Saints team that a lot of people can't put their finger on how they're going to be. Following St. Kilda is Carlton, one of the oldest teams in the league, but a team a lot like St. Kilda. This was a team everybody was going to make the playoffs this year, was going to make the finals this year, and they have just not shown up. They have not played well. They had a good win this last week, but now the question is, can they back it up? Can they do it again? Following that, Gold Coast, like I said, a team that perennial losing team, not very good, but a big win this morning over Richmond, which I think has been absolutely hilarious, seeing so many people freak out because Richmond lost to Gold Coast. Absolutely insane. From there, following Gold Coast would be the Adelaide Crows, a team that last year finished last, which fun fact, the team that finishes last in the Australian Football League actually gets a prize. They get what is called the wooden spoon. So you don't want to win the wooden spoon because that means you have finished worst in the entire AFL. So following that, we have Collingwood. Collingwood again, the New York Yankees team that's kind of, they're progressing, they're kind of changing things all through that. In 17th is the Hawthorn Hawks, a team that was dominant for a long period of time, but unfortunately their reign has come to an end over the last few years. They're slowly getting out some of the 2-time flag champions that won a couple of flags in the late teens into between 2013 and 2015. They won 3 flags. So a really dominant club, and unfortunately they're kind of bottoming out, getting the young draft picks and making their rise up. And this year, unfortunately, North Melbourne is really kind of changed their roster completely, and they're kind of paying for it. They've played much better footy over these last 4 weeks. They have really, really been a tough out. They have pushed Melbourne all the way to the 4th quarter. They have pushed Geelong to the 4th quarter. They have pushed the Western they get the Western Bulldogs this week and hopefully can make up for that disastrous game early in the season. But that is the AFL standings as we speak. Again, 4 points for a win, 2 points for a draw, 0 points for a loss. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on the stretch run to the finals. 22 games altogether will be played. The top 8 teams make the finals. I will explain the finals really quickly, but I may throw a few people off really quickly. 1, 4, 2, 3 will play each other in basically what I call a second chance game. If you win, you automatically jump to the semifinals of the playoffs or the finals. The loser then will play the winner of 5, 8, 6, 7, getting a second chance to stay in the playoffs. So that's why you want to finish in the top 4, because even if you lose game 1, you still have a chance to stay and win the flag. The winners of, like I said, 5, 8, 6, 7 will play the losers of 2, 3. Those 2 teams play, the winners will then cross the bracket from where they originally started to the opposite winner of the 1, 4, 2, 3. They will play in what's called a preliminary final or semifinals, as we call them here. They call the elimination final week the previous week the semifinals. Why, I'm still trying to figure that out, but I'm not going to complain. It's Australia. I don't have a problem. The two winners of the semifinals or preliminary finals will play in the grand final or the Super Bowl of Australia. This is a crazy day because in Victoria, where the game is played at the mighty MCG, which can hold 100,000 people, the Friday before the game, it is a state holiday. Nobody works. Everybody goes to a parade which celebrates the two teams that are there. And then the next Saturday afternoon, the game is played. Here in the States, depending on what time zone you are in, the game could start as late as midnight and as early as 9:30 p.m. And trust me, it is worth it. It is Super Bowl pageantry. It is the great game, and the winner is going to be crowned the champion of that season. And this season, as you can see, we are 14 games in. It is absolutely a blast seeing it. All the buys are done. So from now on, every game, every team will be playing every week from now on. We are crossing our fingers that COVID doesn't stop this season because it has been an absolute delight to see some of these teams play. This top four, just looking at it right now, are four of some of the best teams in the league. But even all the way to eighth, you've got some teams that can cause some trouble if they get in. So I cannot wait to see how the rest of this season goes. In fact, I'm keeping an eye on my clock right now at 10:45 tonight, my time, 11:45 Eastern, so on and so forth. We have a really big game between Melbourne and GWS. GWS has a chance, if they can upset Melbourne, to get themselves back in the opportunity to get into the finals. Melbourne has a chance to continue to keep the stranglehold on the number one overall spot in the finals.
Yeah, and just like you were saying in the standings, on the one plays 4, 2 plays 3, and the losers of that play 5 and 8. The winners of 5 and 8, 6 and 7. The 1 through 4 basically have like a double elimination of their first game. So even if Melbourne goes undefeated and loses the first game, they can still go all the way because by them losing, they're just going to face the weaker teams and then work their way up. Yeah. As for the 5 through 8, it's kind of a single elimination. You lose, you're out. But I liked how it was interesting how AFL, they don't call it the playoffs, they call it the finals. And then when you get to, you could say the Super Bowl, you call it the grand final. I thought that was very interesting and a very unique way of putting it and making it different, like all the other sports, not saying playoffs. There was one thing that we also never mentioned was the interchange. Because there's 22 players and 18 are on the field, that means there's 4 players on the sideline. And 3 of them you can interchange with 3 players per game and sub 1 in case of injury.
Okay, now I'm going to interrupt you really, really quickly because I think what you caught was the "This is AFL," and unfortunately, since that video was put out, they actually have changed the rules. The 4 bench players can all sub in, and they added this year what they call a medical sub. That is a sub in case there is any injury that can take you off the field. It was primarily put in for concussions because they had a rash of concussions over the last couple of seasons. But they kind of opened it up to where if there is a debilitating injury to the point where you cannot continue. So say somebody tears their groin in the middle of the second quarter. They cannot play. There's no way they can kick. They can't run anymore. The medical sub can then be put in their place, thus keeping the 4 players able to rotate in and out. The other thing that you got to keep an eye on is the number of rotations. You are limited to 75. They have changed it since, again, last year it was 90. This year they changed it to 75. I think to kind of make late in the game to where if you run out of interchanges, you can't make any more subs. The guys that are on the bench, well, they're there. They can't come on anymore. So thus making fatigue even more of a possibility and making the coaches think, well, I really don't want to make a ton of substitutions because I may need 10 in the final quarter. with 3 minutes left to make sure that my superstar is got his rest, and then when he comes back in, he can finish the game. So there is that kind of intrigue where the rotations, only having 75, you really have to pay attention, because if you blow that and it's all gone and there's still 8 minutes left in the game, well, all your players now have to play the next 8 minutes with no substitutions. Nobody can come off, and if somebody gets hurt, they can't be replaced. So it really does add a whole degree of difference and change to it, because unlike American football, where you can rotate an entire offense, an entire defense anytime you want, no, this is one of those, if your full forward needs a break and there's 8 minutes left and you've got 4 interchanges, but you've got midfielders that are probably going to need it, that full forward may just have to stay, get some win when he can, and your midfielders maybe need to make a couple exchanges to be able to make sure your midfield is there come when the whips are cracking.
So now my question to you is, if the team substitutes all the players and say there's, for instance, 5 minutes left, and like you said, an injury occurs and there's no possibility of another substitution, does that mean that that team is down a player on the field?
Not on the field, on the bench. In that situation, so say we get there. Okay, so you have your 22 and you use your medi sub mid-second quarter, right? If you still have an exchange, which I think most teams will keep a rotation late just in case that happens. They probably wouldn't exhaust their rotations with 4 minutes left, so on. So because in case you do have an injury, you want to be able to sub them off. But if that injury happens and you've already used your injury sub, well, now you're down to 3 guys on the bench because that guy's going to go sit. He can't play anymore. Now you've only got 3 guys to rotate, which now means rotations are even less, because if a guy comes off, I mean, he's going to want at least a minute, minute and a half to catch his breath so he can be full-fledged to go. Well, if you've only got 3 guys, if 2 guys come off during a goal kick, well, there's only 1 guy left now that can sub in, because 2 guys are trying to catch their breath. They're trying to get a drink. They're getting a massage from the physios to be sure that their legs don't cramp up, anything like that. So it is kind of hectic. You will have an assistant coach controlling the rotations, and they're keeping an eye on it. They have computers. There are tons of computers and statistics in this game. It's insane watching it sometimes, but these coaches know everything. They know right down to how many times a guy is in and off and how long they've been on the bench. So I've never seen a team lose track of rotations because they've got a counter on their bench. So they'll make sure. But yes, if a guy gets injured and there's no medical sub to sub him off, they're down a player. So then now they only have 3. And I saw a game earlier this year where 4 guys got hurt. There was only 1 guy to rotate for the rest of the game. There were still 5 minutes left in the game.
Wow, that's definitely a big game changer towards the end of the game. That could be very crucial to win.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're wrapping up with our podcast, what team do you think out of the AFL standings has the best chance to make it to the grand final and win it all this year? Because we know Richmond has won the 3 out of the 4, and they're possibly might be eliminated this year.
Oh man, so early to make this call. I really wish I had that crystal ball to be able to tell me where teams finish out. If I go on form, if I go on the teams that I've seen over this last year, and you can kind of see their form here on this statistic that the Western Bulldogs and the Melbourne Demons have some of the best form right now. They've won 5 of their last 6. Both teams are playing incredible footy. It's hard not to go with these two. Melbourne is the best defense. They're so hard to beat defensively. They hold teams to under 60 points so many times. May and Lever, 2 of their great defenses, are great intercept mark players. They really make it difficult to score on them because they're so good defensively. They don't make mistakes. They very rarely get beat, so they're very hard to beat. The Western Bulldogs are kind of like the Harlem Globetrotters. They are just this fast, high handballing, run and gun team. They score a lot of points. They absolutely obliterate teams when they want to, because they've got some of the best midfielders in the league, including who I think is going to be the MVP of the entire league, or the Brownlow medalist, Marcus Bontempelli, who is 6'3", 230 pounds here, and is one of the best midfielders in the entire league. The man is absolutely unstoppable. He's averaged 30 disposals over the last 6 weeks. He's putting in a couple of goals for midfielders, which is not something most midfielders do consistently. The guy is a tackling machine. He runs well with the footy. He's a great kick. Right now, if you really force me to, it's hard to say that Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs are not the two teams I see in the finals. But I'm going to put this caveat here. I really, really like Brisbane, the way they're going. They're three-headed monster up front with Danaher, Joey Hipwood, and Charlie Cameron, one of the best Indigenous players in the entire AFL. He's absolutely electric. He's like Steph Curry for the AFL. He does so many things. He's so hard to stop. He's so slippery. They're going to be a team that I think is going to give a lot of headaches. Geelong is the team I really want to see. Unfortunately, one of their superstars, Jeremy Cameron, went down with a calf or a hamstring injury this morning, and I think that's going to hurt this Geelong team. He missed several of their first games of the year, and they didn't play as well. So we'll have to see how Geelong bounces back from that. I think a lot of people, more of the question is, does a 5 through 8 seed make any kind of impact, or is it only the top four, those four teams I mentioned, Melbourne, the Western Bulldogs, Geelong Cats, and Brisbane Lions, are really what many people are saying, the four teams that have a chance to win the flag this year? The rest are going to be there, but that double chance is going to be absolute gold come finals time.
That was definitely a great way to end it, and a great way to put all the comparisons with Steph Curry. And it's just great because not many people know about this sport. And for you to be able to compare it to so many different sports, it makes people think, oh yes, I understand it this way because you compared it, which is something great and something that really needs to be spread. This sport is amazing, and it's great to watch. And I definitely recommend watching it. And of course, we got a head coach here with Donnie Hess. And Coach, I do want to say that you are also a co-host for the Coach Hess Sports Corner.
Yeah, that's actually a sports podcast that I do with a fellow Des Moines Rooster of mine named Brad Crossan, who's an absolutely awesome friend of mine. We talk sports. I am a sports head. I love all sports. If you can see me chatting, I'm constantly in front of the TV. I watch soccer, I watch rugby, I watch cricket. Most people in the States don't know what cricket is very much.
Cricket's awesome.
I'm a college sports guy. I love college basketball. I love college football. I'm not a big NBA or NFL fan. It's nothing against them. For me, they've lost a little bit personally. Again, no offense to people that enjoy it. You do you. That's awesome. So we talk soccer. We talk college athletics. We talk footy. And we kind of talk a little bit of everything. We're working right now on kind of slowly progressing. Again, a small podcast, but we're a couple of Iowa guys that we love to chat our sports. We have the occasional rant when we're not happy about things. So that's always fun. But yeah, it is an absolutely amazing podcast to work with my buddy Brad, who I have the pleasure of working with not only as a co-host for the podcast, but as a player for my lovely Des Moines Roosters here in Des Moines.
Yep, and that is going to do it for Sports Time HQ. Coach Donnie, I thank you for coming on the show, and I thank you for showing up all your knowledge here on the show. And we hope to have you on pretty soon, maybe towards the end when the finals happen, or grand finals even happens. Maybe we could have you on.
Not a problem. If you want to chat the finals and give a preview, I'd be more than willing to. You reach out and let me know. And to anybody that's on Twitter, follow me at Coach Hess 40. I'm always chatting footy. I'm talking sports. If you want to chat any of that, that is absolutely a blast to do. Thank you again, Fernando. This has been awesome.
Yep. And like he said, follow him at Donnie Hess 40. And that is the end of this podcast. My name is Fernando, and I am your host of Sports Time HQ. We'll see you next week.